There is a kind of person you will never see on the news. They do not win awards at ceremonies, where everyone wears the same clothes and smiles the same rehearsed smile. They do not post their victories online, and they do not explain themselves to rooms full of people who never ask the right questions. They wake up, they move through the city, they do the thing they need to do, and they go home. Maybe they pour a drink. Maybe they sit by the window and watch the street like it owes them something. Maybe they write a few lines that no one will read for years or ever. And yet, somehow, they are the ones who outlast almost everyone around them. If you have ever felt like the smartest person in the room, who somehow keeps losing, or like you see through the noise of the world, but cannot figure out why that clarity never translates into the life you wanted, then something in this video was made directly for you. This is not about tricks, strategies, or productivity systems dressed up in philosophical language. This is about a man who failed publicly, repeatedly, and without apology, and who built from that wreckage a way of seeing the world that most people spend their entire lives trying to reach and never do. Here is the thing nobody says out loud. The people who appear to win are usually the ones who learned how to perform winning, and performance is not the same as living. Charles Bukowski understood this at a level that cut straight through the bones of the American century he inhabited. He watched the crowd and he did not envy it. He pitied it quietly, the way you pity a dog that has been trained so thoroughly that it no longer remembers it was ever something wild. The crowd is not smarter than you. The crowd is louder, and loudness gets mistaken for intelligence in rooms where no one is paying close attention. But Bukowski was always paying close attention, even when he looked like he was drunk in a corner, even when he looked like he had given up on everything. Especially then. The quiet habits he practiced were not habits in the motivational sense, not morning routines or journaling prompts or anything you would find in a bestseller. They were survival mechanisms that accidentally became philosophy. The first and most essential was the habit of not pretending. Bukowski worked jobs that destroyed men from the inside, jobs that turned people into extensions of machinery, and he did not romanticize a single moment of it. He worked at a dog biscuit factory. He worked as a parking lot attendant, as a gas station helper, as a stock boy. He carried mail for the post office for over a decade and came home with a body that ached and a mind that refused to surrender. Most people in those situations learn to perform contentment. They learn to say it is fine, it pays the bills, everyone has to work. Bukowski refused that particular lie with a ferocity that was almost religious. He wrote about the tedium with the same precision a surgeon uses on a body, cutting exactly where it hurt most, not to wallow in pain, but to prove the pain was real, and that anyone who said otherwise was the one who had something to hide. Not pretending is harder than it sounds. The world trains you to perform wellness. It trains you to smooth over the rough parts of your experience so that no one is made uncomfortable by your honesty. From the time you are a child, you are taught to say you are fine when you are not, to smile when you are breaking, to frame your suffering in ways that make it acceptable for public consumption. Bukowski burned all of that down. His poems do not ask for your comfort. They stand there in the room and refuse to apologize for what they are. That refusal is not rudeness. It is a form of radical clarity that most people never develop because they are too afraid of what happens when you stop performing and start simply being. What happens, according to everything Bukowski lived and wrote, is that you become real, and real things, even broken ones, have a weight and permanence that performances never do. The second quiet habit was the practice of trusting boredom. This sounds almost absurd in an era defined by the need to be stimulated at every second, but Bukowski understood something about boredom that the modern world has completely forgotten, which is that boredom is where the important things happen. Not inspiration in the romantic sense, not the sudden flash of genius that stories about artists love to describe, something quieter and more essential. When Bukowski sat in his room with nothing but the sound of the city outside and whatever was left in the bottle, he was not wasting time. He was giving himself the conditions under which something real could surface. The crowd runs from boredom because boredom forces confrontation with the self. and most people would rather run than look. He sat still and looked. He looked until the looking became language, and the language became the body of work that outlived every comfortable, busy, optimized person who ever dismissed him as a drunk with a typewriter. There is a question that this video is building toward, and it is one worth sitting with before we go any further. When was the last time you sat with your own boredom long enough to hear what was underneath it? Not long enough to reach for your phone or turn on a screen or fill the silence with someone else's noise, but long enough to actually feel the shape of your own mind when it is not being entertained. If that question lands somewhere uncomfortable, drop a comment below right now. Just write the words, "I stopped listening to myself and nothing else." You do need to explain anything. You do not need to write a paragraph. Those 4 words are enough because the people who read them in the comments will recognize something in them, and they will feel slightly less alone in a world that never stops asking everyone to perform productivity and call it a life. Your comment does not have to be profound. It just has to be true. The third quiet habit was what could be called strategic invisibility. Bukowski did not campaign for recognition in the way the literary world expected. He did not attend the right parties or cultivate the right relationships, or write the kind of poems that got published in the journals that mattered to the people who decided what mattered. He sent his work out and watched it get rejected, hundreds of times, over years, over decades, until the rejections became almost meaningless because he had stopped measuring his worth by the response of institutions built by and for a version of humanity he had never trusted in the first place. This is the part that people misread as failure. It was not failure, it was a kind of inoculation. Every rejection that did not kill his practice made the practice more purely his own. The habit of staying invisible when the world wants you to perform, staying focused when the world wants you to react, staying committed to the thing you are building when no audience yet exists, is perhaps the most sophisticated form of intelligence available to any human being. It looks like nothing from the outside. It feels like everything from the inside. What Bukowski understood about the crowd, about the noisemakers and the system followers and the performance artists of ordinary ambition, was that they were playing a game with rules they had never written and a prize that had been defined for them by someone else entirely. The suburb, the career ladder, the relationship performed for the approval of other people who are also performing relationships, the carefully managed image of a life that is going well, all of it was a system designed to produce predictable human beings for a world that needed predictable labor and predictable consumption. And predictability is the one thing that makes art or real life impossible. He did not hate these people. That is an important distinction. He watched them with something closer to sorrow than contempt, the way you watch someone eating something that is slowly making them sick without knowing it. He drank his beer and wrote his poems and let them have their suburban lawns and their Monday morning performances, and he stayed in the cheap room with the typewriter and kept working. The fourth habit was perhaps the least glamorous and the most important, which was the habit of finishing. Not finishing in the sense of polishing things into perfection, but finishing in the sense of completing the movement from experience to expression without stopping in the middle to ask whether it was good enough or whether anyone would want it. Bukowski wrote thousands of poems. Most of them are not among his famous ones. He did not stop writing the ordinary ones in search of the extraordinary. He trusted that the extraordinary would emerge from the volume and the honesty of the practice, and he was right. The crowd stops before finishing. It starts 100 things and abandons them when the initial excitement fades and the real work begins. It waits for the conditions to be perfect, for the inspiration to arrive in the form it imagined, for the external validation to confirm that the effort is worth. Continuing, Bukowski did not wait. He sat down and worked in spite of the hangover, in spite of the rejection, in spite of the silence from the world that should have been paying attention. That persistence was not romantic heroism. It was stubbornness that became discipline, that became a body of work that changed the way a generation understood what literature could be. Here is the revelation that recontextualizes everything. The quiet habits of people who outsmart the crowd are not about being smarter in the conventional sense. They are about being more honest, more patient, more willing. to sit in discomfort without flinching away from it. Intelligence, as the world defines it, is largely a social performance, a demonstration of fluency in the systems the powerful have built to sort people into useful categories. What Bukowski practiced was a different kind of intelligence entirely, one rooted not in the mastery of systems, but in the refusal to be mastered by them. And that refusal, that quiet, unglamorous daily refusal to perform what you do not feel and aspire to what you do not want and become what the world needs you to be for its own convenience, is available to every person reading this regardless of education, class, talent, or circumstance. The crowd will always be louder. It will always look more organized and more successful and more certain of itself. The question is never whether you can beat the crowd at its own game. The question is whether you are brave enough to refuse the game entirely and start playing the only one that was ever worth anything. If something in this video touched a part of you that has been quiet for a long time, if you recognized yourself in the person who sees through the noise but still cannot find the exit, then give this video a like right now, not for the algorithm, not for the channel, but because every like tells the platform to put this kind of conversation in front of someone else who needs it tonight. Someone sitting in a cheap room somewhere, wondering if they are the only one who feels this way, and they are not. And if you want more of this, if you want to keep going deeper into the philosophy of people who refuse to be shaped by a world that never deserved that kind of surrender, subscribe to this channel. Every video here is built for the person who has been thinking alone for too long. You do not have to agree with everything. You do not have to become a Bukowski devotee or a philosopher or anything other than what you already are. You just have to be willing to keep looking honestly, without apology, at the life you are actually living and ask whether it is yours.